We published a story yesterday, May 17th, titled, Danielle Smith just put Northern Gateway back on the table. Good or bad idea? Today's story contains another clip from Premier Smith's press conference on May 16th. In it, Smith outlines 5 federal regulations that will have to be rolled back or canceled in order to entice a private pipeline company to build Northern Gateway. The list includes Number 1, Environmental Impact Assessment Act, where major projects like pipelines are reviewed to determine if they are in the public interest. 2, the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act that bans oil tankers from British Columbia's northern coast. 3, Bill C-59 that forbids companies from making climate or environment-related claims unless they can prove them. 4, Proposed oil and gas sector greenhouse gas emissions cap that requires 38% lower emissions by 2030. And 5, the federal backstop for the industrial emitter carbon tax, even though the official rate is $95 per ton, but the effective rate actually paid by oil and gas companies is around $27 per ton. Now, the oil and gas industry has been pushing most of these changes for years. A fair question is, why? What is so egregious about the federal rules that the industry hates them so much? Now, I'm going to answer that question with excerpts from interviews with 2 University of Calgary law professors, Sean Fluker and Martin Olashinsky. In the first clip, Fluker explains that 2019 changes to the Environmental Impact Assessment Act, colloquially called Bill C-69, or the No More Pipelines Act by its opponents, were not nearly as drastic or punitive to the industry as claimed by critics. He argues that amendments by the Justin Trudeau Liberals left intact most of the previous legislation passed by Stephen Harper's Conservatives in 2012. In the second clip, Olashinsky gets to the heart of the issue. Federal regulations are far stricter than Alberta rules. Industry doesn't like the more stringent and more vigorously enforced federal system. The difference between the provincial and the federal regulations comes down to one word: discretion. Alberta allows the minister, the Alberta Energy Regulator, and its staff far more leeway when interpreting the rules. That has led to a much more industry-friendly provincial regime. So friendly, in fact, that the AER is generally considered a captured regulator. That is, one that puts the interests of the regulated entities, the oil, gas, and pipeline companies, ahead of the public interest. Before you watch the clip of Premier Smith, a quick clarification. In her clip, she talks about Northern Gateway terminating in Prince Rupert, which is 1,500 kilometers north of Vancouver by car. The previous Northern Gateway project was to terminate in Kitimat, over 200 kilometers to the south of Prince Rupert. It's not clear if this is a mistake or a change in Alberta's strategy, but it's an important point that needs an explanation in fairly short order. While you're watching the 3 clips, I'd like you to consider 2 questions. 1, is a pipeline to Tidewater the best strategy to maximize Alberta's oil resources? Don't take the industry's word for it. The oil sector is notoriously conservative. If it's making money today, it ain't broke and it doesn't need fixing. And don't take the words of politicians like Danielle Smith and Mark Carney. They're self-interested actors. In the case of Alberta, it's royalties and tax revenue the government needs to provide public services. In the case of Ottawa, it's tax revenue the federal government needs to fund a variety of social programs like dental care and pharmacare. 2, who has leverage in these negotiations? Canada or the oil industry in Alberta? In my opinion, it's Canada. A lot has changed in the past month. with U.S. President Donald Trump now beginning to renegotiate trade agreements, which appears to have been his strategy all along. The tariff pressure is off the oil and gas companies for now. One could argue that Canada has some breathing room to more carefully consider its economic options. That's bad news for Smith, because she loses leverage with Carney. This is one of the reasons why Smith is ratcheting up talk about Alberta separating from Confederation. She's trying to take advantage of a unique moment when Canada was pushing back hard against Trump's tariffs and talk of annexing Canada. The bad news for Canadian taxpayers is that not economists, academics, analysts, think tanks, or opposition parties, is proposing alternatives to building more oil pipelines. Canada could take this opportunity to discuss other options than pipelines, but they have no other options to talk about. Stay tuned, because energy media will be suggesting some in the coming weeks.
So what does that mean? Well, they'd have to have a fast-track process to approve that pipeline, so we're not waiting 10 years, and so that it is de-risked to a point where somebody will come along and build it. And if you're going to have that pipeline end at Port of Prince Rupert, well, you're going to have to do a carve-out on the tanker ban so that we can load it onto a boat and get it overseas. And if you do all of that, then you're going to probably have to take the ties off of our energy industry to talk about how we're going to reduce our emissions without facing criminal penalty, because right now that's called greenwashing under their Bill 59. And to be able to get support, we'd have to talk about the Pathways Project and how we might be able to decarbonize the production. And that means no emissions caps, because if you want to increase your export, you can't have an emissions cap which acts as a production cap. And on top of that, we have a framework for how our carbon emissions are priced, which we've been doing since 2007. And we've heard you can't go above $100, otherwise it's going to create an economic environment where people won't invest here. So that means they can't layer on their own carbon tax regime. So those are like 5 things right there that they would signal to me that they were serious about changing things if they agreed to the Port of Prince Rupert revival of Northern Gateway or something like it. So that's what I'm looking for.
The act that Stephen Harper brought in 2012 set out an approval process. The changes that were made under the Environmental Impact Assessment Act were substantive, but not radical. It was more fine-tuning and tinkering and trying to improve, because there was a lot of criticism at the time that the changes didn't go nearly far enough. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, yeah, the Harper Conservatives remodeled environmental impact at the federal level, environmental impact assessment in 2011, 2012, and they turned it into a major project-based assessment process, which is to say federal impact assessment focused primarily from that point forward, focused primarily on major projects. These are major projects largely because their impacts are likely to be significant, or their thresholds, production thresholds are at a certain size, what have you. The act, the Canadian Environmental Impact Assessment, as it was known, was changed to become the Impact Assessment Act in 2019, I think it is, right? 2018, 2019. And the Impact Assessment Act, which is what we currently have, which replaced Harper's Impact Assessment Act, is, you're correct, is not radically different. Still major project based. The government, the federal government, the Liberal government did add a few additional considerations into what goes into a major project assessment, but the fundamental character of the Impact Assessment Act was the same as the structure that the Harper Conservatives enacted. Correct.
So discretion is another way of saying that you have optionality, right? So, and we generally say in environmental law, like, good environmental laws are ones that limit discretion, because when you have broad discretion, the regulators, politicians, bureaucracies will make the decisions that they want to make, as opposed to the ones that are probably that may be in our broader, longer-term interest.
Is it fair to say then that the Alberta Energy Regulator has maybe more discretion built into the system, into the policy, into the regulations than others, and that's so it can always have, it always has the facade, but behind the scenes.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. In fact, and so one of the reasons, for instance, why there's such opposition to things like the Impact Assessment Act in Alberta is that it is much more rigorous. It is much more constraining in terms of the considerations that have to be made, the sort of justification that goes into some of the decision-making points. There's a lot more there than there is under the Alberta regime, under the Environmental Protection Enhancement Act, the EPA. And so that difference alone, absolutely, is going to be one of the reasons why industry and provincial regulators and provincial politicians are opposed to that other regime, because they resent and don't want to be constrained in that way.